But let me get started quick and just welcome you all today. I'm really thrilled with the crowd. This is exciting. I am Peter Russo. I'm the Director of Congressional Affairs at the CATO Institute. And again, I want to thank you for coming. This is a Capitol Hill briefing entitled A Conservative Approach to Smarter Federal Marijuana Policy. And first, if you're watching via our live stream and would like to join the conversation, we'd love to hear from you. So please tweet comments and questions to us at #CATO events. And further, this spring, the CATO Institute released the 8th edition of the CATO Handbook for Policymakers. Copies were available to you on the door as you came in, or at the table when you came in, and many of the issues we'll touch on today can be found in the Law and Liberty section. And if you'd like more copies, please contact me after the program. And meanwhile, there are fully searchable PDFs at cato.org if you want to look into it more. So to lead today's discussion is Jonathan Blanks, who is a research associate in CATO's Project on Criminal Justice, and he's also the managing editor of policemisconduct.net. His research is focused on law enforcement practices, overcriminalization, and civil liberties. Blanks has appeared on various television, radio, and internet media, and his work has appeared in internet and national publications as well. So thank you all for coming, and let's welcome Jonathan Blanks.
Thanks, Peter. I'm old enough to remember when I was 1996, I was in my college dorm, and I opened up my mailbox and got my National Review. It was February, and it was a big red cover that said, "The war on drugs is lost." The flagship periodical of the intellectual conservative movement had conceded the end of the drug war. Unfortunately, that hasn't translated to direct policy on the federal level, but it has, in the 20 years past, we have come a considerable way. The Republican nominee for president, and obviously the President Trump, was 100% behind medical marijuana on the campaign trail. 29 states have some form of legalized marijuana, and that represent 115 electoral votes that went for the Republican candidate. More than 200 million American residents, that's 62% of the population, live where medical marijuana is legal. Nationwide, 71% of Americans, including 63% of Republicans, oppose federal interference with state legal marijuana laws. Since 2014, the Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment has maintained an imperfect status quo. That means, for those who are unaware, the Rohrabacher-Farr says that the Department of Justice cannot spend money to prosecute medical marijuana cases in states where it's legal. But the federal reach goes a little further than that. Businesses and dispensaries are still left to deal with the vagaries of federal law, particularly banking and financial regulation, because right now the federal government strongly discourages any marijuana business banks from doing business with marijuana businesses. And so marijuana dispensaries tend to be very cash heavy. They are cash only businesses, and that leads to a number of problems, including security, taxes, and the like. And today we're not up here to make the case that marijuana is great. I don't think anyone on this dais is a marijuana enthusiast, but it is a legitimate policy conflict that affects millions of Americans. Right now, a Republican-controlled Congress can stay put, move forward, or move backward on federal marijuana policy. We believe that Republicans can act in accordance with their principles toward a smarter federal marijuana policy. Indeed, we suggest a tolerant federal policy is consistent with conservative principles on political, legal, and ethical levels. And here to present the case for this are three distinguished speakers. Tom Garrett represents Virginia's 5th Congressional District. Before coming to Congress, he served 6 years in the U.S. Army and was later elected to be Commonwealth's Attorney and State Senator in Virginia. Over his years of public service, Garrett has received awards from the Virginia Chamber of Commerce, the Virginia Association of Commonwealth Attorneys, the American Conservative Union, and FreedomWorks. During his tenure in Congress, Garrett works to advance constitutional principles, rein in reckless spending, improve education initiatives for students, and put the safety and security of the nation above all else. He was named to the House Committees on Homeland Security, Foreign Affairs, and Education and Workforce for the 115th Congress. Garrett received his bachelor's in law degrees from the University of Richmond. Following him, Professor Ilya Soman is a law professor at George Mason University. His research focuses on constitutional law, property law, and the study of popular political participation and its implications for constitutional democracy. That's a mouthful. He is the author of Democracy and Political Ignorance, Why Smaller Government is Smarter, and The Grasping Hand, Kelo versus City of New York, and the limits.
New ended.
no, sorry, of New London and the limits of eminent domain. From 2006 to 2013, he served as co-editor of the Supreme Court Economic Review, one of the country's top-rated law and economics journals. His work has appeared in numerous publications, including the Yale Law Journal, Stanford Law Review, Georgetown Law Review, and many others, including popular media like the New York Times, Room for Debate. He writes regularly for the Volokh Conspiracy at the Washington Post. He clerked for Judge Jerry Smith of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit, and he earned his B.A. summa cum laude from Amherst College, his M.A. in political science from Harvard, and his J.D. from Yale. And last and certainly not least is my colleague Trevor Burrus. He's a research fellow at CATO's Center for Constitutional Studies and managing editor of the CATO Supreme Court Review. His research interests include constitutional law, civil and criminal law and political philosophy and legal history. His academic work has appeared in journals such as the Harvard Journal of Law and Public Policy, the New York University Journal of Law and Liberty, New York University Annual Survey of American Law, Syracuse Law University Law Review, and many others. He's also appeared in many popular media like the Washington Post and the New York Times. He lectures regularly on behalf of the Federalist Society, the Institute for Humane Studies, and the Foundation for Economics Education. He's the co-host of Free Thoughts, a weekly podcast that covers topics in libertarian theory, history, and philosophy. He is the editor of Conspiracy Against Obamacare that holds a BA in philosophy from the University of Colorado at Boulder and the University of Denver College Stern of Law. And please welcome Congressman Garrett.
I try to populate the room with my staffers so that somebody will start the applause. You guys did okay. You shouldn't have told me that Professor Soman writes for Volk, because now I have a bone to pick. We'll start out by going backwards and talking about something other than marijuana, and that is about 4 years ago, I carried a bill in the Commonwealth of Virginia that ended the prohibition on crimes against nature, which was anything other than missionary position sex between people married. And Volk said I had some sort of ulterior motive because I wouldn't include teenagers and adults as a group that were allowed to do that. That's the prosecutor in me. So shame on you guys.
That was one of my co-bloggers, not me.
But suffice it to say, from 1619 until July 1st, 2014, in Virginia, we had very draconian laws regulating what you could do in the privacy of your own home, which was ridiculous, and it does segue well into the marijuana policy debate. I'll start out by reiterating what was just said, and that is that I'm not pro-marijuana. I'm not anti-marijuana. I'm pro-Constitution. I'm pro-liberty. I'm pro-government that enforces its laws. We'll start with 3 anecdotes. The first comes from my time as a prosecutor. This is me putting myself on a stopwatch so I know when I've talked too long. I either speak until 3 people fall asleep or I hit a time limit. And that is 2 parallel stories, those of 2 young men who were arrested in the county that I prosecuted in for almost analogous offenses. Both had roughly the same amount of marijuana, roughly the same amount of cash and firearms, and were arrested for possession with intent to distribute. One was African American and adopted, and the other was Caucasian and the child of a very prominent member of the community. And we prosecuted both identically, despite the fact that for the Caucasian young man, we received letters from literally every member of the Board of Supervisors, the elected sheriff, who was an African American, and other prominent community members saying what a good young man this was and how we should take it easy on him. I went in the back room with my deputy prosecutor and said, because the African-American young man had come first, and said, if we treat this person any different than the other person, then we have no business holding this job in this country. That is, that justice that isn't blind isn't justice. By its very definition, if laws are not equally applied, then they are not just. And where there are laws that are unjust, the value of all other laws is reduced. That is, as I look at what is promulgated as law, and I see that some laws are uniformly applied and some are disparately applied, in my mind, as a rational thinking human being, I think, what's law? What do I need to obey? What do I not need to obey? And so the first breakdown as it relates to federal marijuana policy is that we have, in the case of marijuana policy, a series of laws that are either unequally applied or discretionarily applied, but that they manifest themselves in their misapplication or their different application in inherent injustice. So, for example, in fact, these 2 young men were sentenced to, I think, within a month or 2 of the exact same sentence as one another, and we don't do sentencing, but we argued the case the exact same way. I ignored the political pressure, which I can tell you that carrying H.R. 1227 or HB 1227, which we have here in Congress, is not popular in the largely rural 5th District of Virginia. But what I like to say is that might not be popular, but what is popular in my district is doing the right thing. And so if you take an analogous set of circumstances and a young man, say, for example, in Virginia, he may very well end up in federal prison. I stress the word federal because these are federal laws. And then take the same set of circumstances and apply them to a young person in, say, for example, Colorado, thank you. And he may be an entrepreneur, right? And so inherently, you have a circumstance that's unjust. And so that will diminish the opinion of the rule of law to individuals, not only by deed, but by act. And it will lead to outcomes that are unfair. Now, we'll never have fairness in this world, right? Gandhi said man cannot be made good by law. But the founders also didn't give us a perfect union. They said we should aspire to be a more perfect union, right? So we should always try to have laws in the books that we're willing to enforce uniformly. Or, in the words of Attorney General Jeff Sessions, right, if you don't like the law, change it. We'll move to the next anecdote. Lisa Smith, a mother, a professional woman, comes to my office as a member of the Virginia Senate. I, for 2 years, was the lead Republican patron, and I stress Republican because it was a Democrat's bill. Dave Marsden, will give him some credit, on medical marijuana reform. And it's not, candidly, to be completely fair, the first time I heard the expression medical marijuana, I promise you I giggled and thought, damn, that's a creative way to move towards. But the more I learned, the more I realized that we have these draconian laws as a result, ultimately, of a misunderstanding and a demonization of something that, for whatever reason, and I think there were probably some ethnic and racial undertones, is just not accurate. So, for example, we know scientifically that if you have digestive intolerance due to chemotherapy, if you have terminal pain management issues, some PTSD type things, glaucoma was the original, or in the case of Lisa Smith and the daughter for whom she was a champion, a child with intractable epileptic seizures. Now we know, based on science and results, that THC extracts, the cannabinoid extracts, can be effective in all the areas that I've named, all of them. And as we work to create a circumstance in Virginia where patients or parents and their medical professionals can make the decisions that they deem to be in their own best interest of that of their minor children, the pharmacists were one of the greatest lobbyists against us. Now, you could say that's because Big Pharma has an interest, and we could discuss that. But I think the argument they made was a valid one, and that is they can't carry these products because there's a federal regulatory scheme that prohibits it. If there's another ulterior motive, so be it, but that's a legitimate argument. So as we move towards doing what's right to empower individuals to make decisions with their medical professionals for their own best interest or that of the people in their care, there are barriers to entry along the way, and they'll remain to be there so long as the federal government chooses not to act to reform its own policy. So what our bill does is, and people go, it's legalization. I say, well, to the extent that it's federal, I suppose it would be legalization, but what it is a recognition of enumerated powers and federalism, and the fact that Alabama might choose to do something different than New York, but I can't find anywhere in the Constitution the underpinnings of what should allow us as a federal government to regulate this product that would grow naturally throughout large swaths of our country, were we not to make an effort to eradicate it, right? So that's number two. And then tertiarily, the 5th District of Virginia grows about 7/8 of all the tobacco grown in Virginia. Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Kentucky are uniquely situated geographically as it relates to climatological and horticultural realities to be monsters in the industry of agricultural hemp, right? And when we don't do hemp in America, why? Because it's got a first cousin, marijuana, that has been vilified and demonized over literally 5 generations. So what we have on the front end is an idea that we should have equal justice, that justice should be blind or else it will not be justice. The second is that people and their medical professionals make better decisions for people and their dependents than does an overarching federal government who doesn't know their name nor care. And the third is that there's economic opportunity lost in a region of the state that's suffered economically by virtue of the fact that we have a crop that would be profitable. We literally, hemp is a multi-$100 million import right now, and our export's virtually nil. And so, I mean, there's more corn grown in the county I grow up in every year than there is hemp and acreage grown in the entire United States. So, 3 good reasons for the federal government to get the heck out of the way. Now, if you want a fourth, it's that foundationally, there's no purview for the government, the federal government, to insert itself into this arena. But I mean, I guess we live in the world we live in, not the world we wish we lived in. So there we are. I tell everybody, and I'm speaking to Normal later today, and I'll blow their minds when I tell them I'm not pro-marijuana. I'm pro-justice. I'm pro-medical choice. I'm pro-freedom. I'm pro-appropriate level of government having domain over particular issues. And so by virtue of those sort of philosophical underpinnings, I arrive naturally at this conclusion. Now, where's the Republican Party? AWOL, right? I mean, if you look at who's on this issue, who's right on this issue, and you do it in the virtue of a political continuum that's a circle, what you've got is the libertarian leaning right and sort of progressive, sort of forward leaners who've merged in the middle somewhere, and you've got the middle of both parties who I would argue, without naming names because I can do that, are afraid to do anything that might be not politically expedient and are willing to make politically expedient decisions at the expense of ultimately justice, individual liberty, and economic opportunity. Shame. So, I've had a lot of people tell me this isn't a political winner for me. I don't rightly care what's a political winner. I genuinely believe that if you do what's right, you tell people why you think it's right, that politically that's a winner. And so here we are at the forefront, and it's an honor to be here. I got 8 minutes and 27 seconds on the stopwatch. I just want to go real quickly over a few more things, and then I'll wrap up and we can move on, and then we can maybe take questions. But the whole sort of philosophical underpinning of where I ended up politically is that Jeffersonian construct of liberty that's sort of pulled from Locke and Hobbes and Newton to a tertiary degree, that your liberty should stop where mine starts, that you should be free to do that which you choose to do so long as there's not an impact on others that's negative. And that's easy, and that's who we're supposed to be as a nation. And that, government certainly has grown far, far beyond the specifically enumerated powers, but anything we can do to inch back towards that federalist construct where that Jeffersonian premise that government closest to the people, that is local government, governs best, governs most easily held to account, and governs most frugally is a step in the right direction. Having said that, it's still going to be a long slog. Having said that, in life you have but two choices. You can fight or you can quit, and everybody here today is a fighter, or else they wouldn't be here, and I'm not in the mood to quit. So thank you all for having me, and certainly once these other fine individuals have had an opportunity to speak, I'll be happy to hit some questions.
I'd like to start by thanking CATO for organizing this event and all of you for coming, and Representative Garrett for his leadership on this important issue. About a week ago, I was being interviewed by a radio talk show host about something else, and he said, I can't be a libertarian because I've never tried pot. And I said, well, by that standard, I'm not a libertarian either, because I'm one of the few people who went to college in the 1990s